All right, so I'll go ahead and do a quick intro for Mirin. So Mirin Fader is a senior staff writer for The Ringer, as well as the New York Times bestselling author of the book Giannis, the Improbable Rise of an NBA MVP. This book is also a Los Angeles Times bestseller, Wall Street Journal bestseller, US Today bestseller, Publishers Weekly bestseller. So just so many bestsellers, and we're really lucky to get to hear Mirin's expertise today and have her talk to us about Giannis's and his brothers and whole family's amazing journey. So everyone give it up for Mirin. We're so excited to have you talk to us today.
Thanks so much for having me. This is awesome. So I guess, should I start out with just how the book got started, or a little bit more about me, or?
Yeah, I guess you can talk about your start and why you decided to write about it.
Okay. So you all can't see, but I'm actually very short. But growing up, I wanted so badly to become a basketball player. I was one of those girls that had like a basketball like at my hip all the time, and I wanted to be in the WNBA. And I played all the way my first year in college for Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, and pushed it as far as it could go. And I realized, what am I gonna do with my life? And I realized that I loved writing as well. It's always been a hobby for me in my spare time. And then I thought, well, what if I write about basketball? Then I can stay in the sport and enjoy this thing that has been a part of my life since, I was a child. And so it was perfect because I could think about other people's stories and how they got to where they are. And being an athlete gives you an appreciation for all the hard work that goes into, playing at an elite level, and you understand how hard it is to make it. And so I sort of took my athlete lens, put on my writer's hat, and tried to combine both of those passions. I started at the Orange County Register. I was there at the newspaper for about 4 years. And then I moved on to Bleacher Report mag and then The Ringer. And throughout this time, I've always wanted to write a book. Like, I love books. And it was really hard at first because it was like, well, the response I would hear is, you're too young, or I like your idea, but I don't think it'll sell. There was just nothing quite right with what I was proposing, and also trying to secure the right representation to, take me seriously. And when I was at Bleacher Report, I saw that Giannis had a fourth brother, Alex. And, at this time, around like 2017, 2018, Giannis and his family were not this like public facing thing, like they are now. They are always together. It's very well known about the family. But at the time, it wasn't. I mean, most people didn't even know he had a fourth brother. So Alex was about 15-ish at that time, 16. And so I wanted to know, what is it like being the fourth brother? What kind of pressure comes with that? And, is he talented? Do we have a next budding, really, really good player in our midst here that we should have our eyes on? So wasn't even thinking about a book. I just went to Milwaukee to report the story on Alex. And I go to the house, and Giannis is in the house. And I'm just stunned because, I just didn't think he would be there. I never expected to interview Giannis. It was about Alex. But the more time I spent with Giannis and his mom and the brothers, I was like, this isn't really just about Alex, and this really isn't just about Giannis. Their stories, they intertwine, they intersect. You can't talk about one without the other. And so it's kind of like, I realized this is a family story. So when that profile came out, it ended up revealing as much about Giannis as it did Alex. And at the time, I finally talked with a literary agent that, really believed in me and said, hey, if you have any ideas, let me know. And so I said, what do you think if we turn this article into a book? Giannis's story, it's relatable, it's universal. even if you know nothing about basketball, there's parts of his story that you can really, find interesting and compelling. And at that point, he hadn't won his first MVP. He was becoming a star, but it wasn't what it is now, which is like, Giannis, the face of the league. And so the publisher thought it was a great idea. So that's how it got started. It just shows you never know what can happen when you show up to an interview. And when I talk to young journalists who say, oh, I'll just phone in the interview, I'll just call them and look at all this stuff with AI, chat GPT or whatever. It's like, man, nothing can replace showing up in real life, seeing what can happen. And that one day changed my whole life. So it was really awesome to get to know them that day.
I feel like it would be really hard to use Chat GPT to do 221 interviews.
I know. Well, and that's the thing that I feel so strongly about this topic is because, so much you can't Google Giannis's childhood friends. Like, this information does not exist, right? The thing with AI is that it's taking stuff that exists. But when you do original reporting, that's you calling the one name asking for rosters from 2005 or 6 or 7, and then seeing if you can find one of those. Somehow you find him on WhatsApp, you call him, you say, who do you know? And it leads you to the next, right? That's reporting. AI cannot do the groundwork of a journalist. And that was the fun part. It's like, I'm talking to all these people whose first language is Greek. And I'm just asking them, like, what do you remember about a young Giannis? So it definitely, it's one of those things where it's like, you need to talk with everyone who was there, because a lot of times when somebody has such an amazing story and such a transcendent story, and it's very fairy tale, and, he went from this really, really difficult background to this wonderful success, it all tends to become mythologized as time goes. And so you really want to get to the people who were there to say, no, actually, you know what? Giannis was not good at basketball in the beginning. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. He could not make a layup, and it's like stuff like that really, really makes the journalism worthwhile, because you end up seeing the real story.
I have so many questions to ask you now, because I'm like, yeah, for those who don't know, Mirin had to interview 221 people for this whole book. So just like, how does one do that?
Lots of coffee. And if there was ever a time to do it, it would be the time of the pandemic. So I got the book deal right before the world shut down. I went to Milwaukee literally right before, like, there was a 10-day period right before the NBA shut down and the world shut down. And I interviewed the youngest brother one last time. And I was listening to the daily podcast, and they were talking about, like, this pandemic could come to America. My mom is texting me, get sanitizer. And I'm thinking, like, we're going to find sanitizer at home in Los Angeles. I don't need to get it in Milwaukee, And she's like, trust me, things are getting bad. And so sure enough, that's what happened. But seriously, if there was ever a time to not go outside, it was that. It required that type of discipline of, waking up super early my time because of the time difference in Greece. And sometimes I had to use a translator because their first language obviously was not English. But I think that's the thrill and the joy of reporting. 221, it is a lot, but when you're in it, it's so fascinating. You want to get that next interview. And I think, nothing was really much known about his childhood. The only thing we knew at that point was he sold trinkets on the street, and then he just becomes a star for the Bucks. And as a journalist, I'm thinking, that's a huge information gap, right? Like, what street, what trinkets, how'd you get the trinkets? Like, what was that like, And so I just felt like, wow, this is such an exciting opportunity to find out, those things. And I also really wanted to talk to as many people as I could to see if there were other sides of the story other than anguish. It was very much like life was really hard, abject poverty. But, anyone who grows up in similar circumstances knows that at the same time, with those realities, there's also tons of joy because you don't know any different and you are just with your family every day. And so for me, it was very important to highlight that while he had a really difficult childhood, that is true, he also had a really nice childhood in the sense that he always felt loved. He always felt taken care of. He had so much fun with his brothers. So for every difficult moment in the book, you see, a moment of joy as well.
And that was something that I really loved about reading this book was there were so many avenues that you explored, whether it was the technicalities of the game, Giannis's childhood, the family saga, um, grappling with racism that Giannis faced both in America and abroad in Greece, the fight for citizenship. You went through all of these avenues and you were able to get a full story for all of these. And I guess my question with that is, how do you balance all of these elements to tell such a full and complete story?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question because it was so hard. That was one of the hardest parts because I'm like, we can't have Giannis reach the NBA by page 400. Like nobody is, unless it's like a presidential book, nobody is reading a 600-page book. And his childhood is so rich that you literally could do the whole book on just the Athens period. And so I think first thing I think of is audience. I like to think of myself as like the crossover between people that listen to NPR and people that read ESPN, like people that appreciate sports, but also human stories. And so I can't just give you all basketball, all the physical transformation. And then on the flip side, I can't just give you all political and historical and things like that, because basketball readers will be like, wow, I respect that. I love Giannis. He's my favorite player. I don't really much care about the political context. And so it's sort of like trying to satisfy every audience you can think of and not overwhelming the reader with too much. At the same time, I felt it was really important to give it that well-rounded look because, like I said, I felt like Giannis's story was so much of a fairy tale at that point. And just knowing what I know about history and politics in the world is that a lot of immigrants, especially Black immigrants, were not treated the same as their white counterparts. And so it is impossible to tell his story without acknowledging these other parts to it. I don't know about you all, but like I consider myself somebody that really loves and appreciates history. And I had never heard of Golden Dawn, the terrorist organization in Greece that like roamed his neighborhood. So I felt like I really had to strike the balance between you must include this stuff because it matters and it's important, because how Giannis is treated in his own country will inform everything that happens next as he becomes a basketball player. At the same time, this is a story and an odyssey about a boy who just happens to have this miraculous talent up inside him, ready to be unleashed, and he doesn't even know it yet. So you're telling a basketball tale, but you're telling a human tale at the same time.
It's kind of hard to silo those things because to silo them would to take away from a human experience, which I feel like that is such a strength of your writing, is getting at the core of the human experience of the athlete who you're portraying.
I mean, I really appreciate that. I think one of the things that I found most, I think there's so much endearing about Giannis, but one of the most endearing of him during the childhood years was the sensitivity and also the playfulness, because you see both as an adult, but there were moments in his childhood that we brought up, like he would cry after games because he expected so much out of himself, or he was funny. He tried to sneak his non-Christian friend into the church to get food. Like, you see all these glimmers of the adult he would become. And that to me was cool. It's like the human story doesn't detract from the basketball story. It sort of informs like, oh yeah, of course he would end up the way he is now. Like he had these things as a child and teen.
Like him trying to get his driver's license.
Yeah.
The whole time I was just rooting for this NBA player to get his driver's license.
It's so cute, right? And like when he gets his first car and, he's like insisting on the used car. And that's the thing. Like I've been covering sports for quite some time. This doesn't happen. You don't have a GM giving you a ride to the gym. Like you don't have a whole organization like there for you like this. This doesn't happen anywhere else. I think a lot about what if he wasn't drafted into a small market team? Would he just not have been given that individual attention and then gone on to Europe and had a 10-year successful career in Europe? I don't know. I think like he needed to come to this place and this organization to have those kinds of like mentors and help.
What do you think a lot of people mischaracterize Giannis as, both as a player or a person, that you hope that your book kind of like dispels that myth?
Number one, because he is so thoughtful and intelligent and charismatic, hardcore basketball people label him as soft, which is such a messed up term, I guess, like in our culture. He is I think we should be able to understand where he's coming from when he says, I don't view this as a failure. And it's at the season, his recent comments, and that he's an insane competitor with incredible drive. These two things don't, just because you feel that way does not mean that you are soft or somehow lack the competitive desire to be the best, because he is the best. The other thing I don't think people understand about him is that he was in a very difficult position to speak out about the racism that he experienced in Greece because they barely gave him his citizenship papers. And I think a lot of Nigerian people want as big of a connection with Giannis as the Greek people do. They wish Giannis played for the Nigerian national team. But we all need to understand that Giannis, at the time of this book was under 30. Like any person who's in their late 20s, they're trying to figure out their lives and they're trying to figure out how they feel about their identity. And I think it's normal that he is processing all of these things about identity and race and things like that. So I just wish people, allowed him the grace and humanity of being as thoughtful as he is. It's not a sign of weakness. I think it's such a sign of maturity. He's like so well beyond his years.
Yeah, and has experienced so much. I think reading your book and hearing the comment that he made like last weekend about the season and it being a failure or not a failure, like it just gave it that much more context, because like all of his history as a child, it just put everything in perspective. Every chance that he gets to play a game, I'm sure, is a chance to just get to play.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw that clip, I was like, of course he thinks this way. How can you go through life where, and this is a big part of the book too, is that just because you have money, security, generational wealth, immediate, like incredible success and joy, it does not mean that you don't still carry that part in the back of your mind of childhood trauma and scarcity. And I think the book really tried to show that even at his highest success, he feared losing it all. So it does not surprise me that he would be able to take a step back and view this loss differently than, many of us growing up in America, because when you come from a place where you don't know where your next meal is, you just don't look at things like sports the same. It's all insignificant in the grand scheme. However, that doesn't mean that he doesn't care and want with his whole fiber and being to win. I think people really don't get that. You can have that perspective that he has, and you can be this killer, whatever, all the hyper masculine things that they want to call you in sports. And it's okay to think the season was a failure because they were so good and expected to be so good. And it's okay that Giannis doesn't feel that way, because we know his backstory now. And we know that, of course, he's going to view it differently. All these things can be true.
Like that quote that you wrote just is like a repetitive theme. What would you do if it got taken away? Like
Yeah.
that line, I think that was what I thought about throughout that interview.
Yeah, like what if we all went to sleep and woke up and we're back where we started? I mean, that line was so chilling to me, like when they told that to me. And like, that's why even in the championship parade and when he was at Chick-fil-A, ordering, he looked at Mariah and he's like, what if, she's like, why do you have the trophy with us? Like, we're like, you won, why are you clutching it so hard? And he's just like, because what if it's a dream? What if it could all go away? And it's like, he's joking, but we know he's not, because you don't just lose that like fear of losing things. Like there was a quote midway through this past season. Somebody was like, what motivates you, Giannis? And he was like, I'm desperate. He said, I'm desperate. Something like, I'm desperate. I want to win so bad. And it's back to that mindset of what if we lost it all? So, some athletes are motivated purely by winning. They really are. But you will find more than not, especially ones that come from, difficult backgrounds like Giannis, that actually the fear of losing, the fear of loss, that can be an incredible motivator, more so than even like achieving things or winning things.
And I thought that you did such a good job of like showing that as like a like not as a romantic notion, but just like through all angles of his and his family's experience uh of that driving force too.
Yeah, no, thanks for saying that. That was actually a really big emphasis for me because, now we all, like I said, now we see the family. But at the time, I felt like, well, we don't really know much about this guy, Thanasis, who happens to be on the team. Who's Alex, the youngest one? Like, is he any good? Kostas, oh, interesting. He was on the Lakers. What do we know about him? I just felt like their stories were in the shadow too. So there are times where you'll have like 2 or 3 pages about just one of the brothers. And that's because if you ask Giannis what are his most important things in his life, number one is family. So you can't write a book about him without detailing, his family members. And that starts with the mom. Honestly, she had really never done any interviews at all before this. And when I was there that day for the story that turned into the book, we were sitting on this couch and we were like pretty far apart on the couch, both ends. And interviewing can be awkward. I'm a stranger. Who is this girl coming into, who is she? And there's the mom. And, she's like, I don't know if I want to talk. And like midway through our interview, she like handed me an Altoid. And I felt like it was such a nice gesture. And I felt like, okay, we're talking about stuff, and felt like a good connection there. And I knew I needed to include her story first and foremost. Well, what was life in Nigeria like? Why did you feel the need to leave? How hard was it for you at first? We're talking about Giannis, but think about the parents and their own struggles and desires. So yeah, it was very important to include all of those. And I think the brothers in particular, they're all equally proud of each other, right? There's no jealousy between them. It is so genuine. But at the same time, they all want to make their mark in basketball as individuals too. And so it's a brother story, but also like they work hard too, and their stories deserve time as well. There was one anecdote I think it was Thanasis. It was about chopping the tree down or something. He felt like his whole career, he was just chopping at this thing and it's not coming down, chop, chop, chop. And so he finally chopped the tree down. And I think that's incredible. You never see multiple members of the family in this highly competitive professional basketball experience. And I know people have said what they've said about him. Oh, he doesn't deserve to be there. He's only there because of Giannis. But, as you all have seen, I'm sure from watching their games, like he provides incredible energy and he helps Giannis stay calm and happy. That to me has earned the paycheck in itself.
One thing, so when you mentioned Giannis's mom giving you an Altoid, like I'm like, oh my gosh, because throughout the book, Giannis's family, like very much so, is reserved and like a little bit anxious with trusting people, like because of their experiences that they've had to deal with. How do you gain the trust in your interviews and help people open up who might be a little bit more guarded?
Yeah, I think that's the whole thing. That's the whole part of it. I always, when I started to get into this, I really wanted to be a great writer. That was like the goal. I want to be great at this, but then the more I did it, I realized that it wasn't really about the writing, it was about the reporting. If you don't have the reporting, if you don't have the ability to talk one-on-one with people face to face and build a connection, then there is no writing, there is no book. And so I think part of it comes from being sensitive to certain things. So for example, like when I first talked with one of the brothers, I'm not going to bring up their dad's death in the first meeting or the first hour, whatever. And when I did, it was after some time, and it was like, are you comfortable speaking about this? I think it's the way that you phrase your questions, because if you were on the other end of this and a reporter was asking you about the toughest things that you went through, how would you want to be approached? Like it's incredibly hard to open up to a stranger about the worst things in your life. So I think as a reporter, the best trait you can have is being empathetic. It doesn't mean, hey, I'm on your side, we're buds. It's more just like, it's not about me asking you the best questions. It's about me being a listener and me being receptive to what you're comfortable with and what you're not. And also, I don't really ask about basketball stuff until like way in, because I care so much more about the human part. And I think players especially, they know immediately if you're here for like a gotcha interview, which at the time for Giannis would have been like, so are you staying in Milwaukee? That was like the only thing he was asked by everyone. And it was such a disrespectful question, because it's like, the man has said he loves this city with all his heart. Like, why are you asking it over and over and over again? So for me, I asked about his brothers, the things that mattered to him. And so I think what really got us like, breaking ground as far as like, feeling a bit more comfortable was asking about like, what are the lessons that you and your husband tried to instill in them, instead of just being like, can you talk about how Giannis is a star now? It's more about like, what values were in the home? Okay, you guys came from Nigeria. Did you raise him in a Nigerian home, in the sense of like, what were some traditional foods that you cooked, or, what languages were spoken? Just like more questions that show like you're there to ask, to learn more about like who they are as people and not just athletes.
What was like an exciting thing that you found out about Giannis or his brothers and family that didn't make it into the book?
Um, you know what? Like, back to the kind of our conversation about the way stories are mythologized, like embellished for sure. When somebody becomes a star, then all these people go back and say crazy, outlandish things. I can't really repeat them because I couldn't verify them, but there were so many just over the top stories of just like, this kid was destined for greatness, and one game he scored 1,000,000 points, and and it just, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And so I think for me, it's like, well, if I can't verify that with somebody else, like, it's just not responsible. I think there could have been a way to couch it like, and the narratives grew and grew. One thing, he was rumored to blah, 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 but I just didn't feel it was responsible, because he really was not good at basketball at the beginning. Truthfully, you guys, like, he really wasn't. And I think that's the beauty of the story, is that he had to work to become awesome. And some of the things that didn't make the book were honestly just narratives, just kind of revisionist history about it. The other thing that was really interesting was the draft chapter. There were so many former executives from other teams that honestly kind of lied about their interest in him. The truth was, like, as I outlined in the book, only the Hawks and the Bucks had any remote interest in him, right? Nobody else was like trading up to get Giannis. Like, it really wasn't, he wasn't on like anyone's draft boards. And a lot of these people tried to pretend that like he was on our top 10, he was this. And so you really have to be so discerning. Is this revisionist history, or was he legit on there? And so that's what I mean about the 221 interviews. It's like, all right, well, I can't just talk to 2 people from the Suns. I got to get 4 who is really in that room, the draft room.
Yeah, it's like conducting a science experiment. You
Yeah.
gotta have like a full group of people. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense to just have 1 or 2 people.
Right. What really happened? Everyone wants to claim credit for somebody's success years down the road.
Yeah, it makes me think of that one scout who you said early on in the book is like, they owe me money because I found him, and they're like, no, that's not true.
Well, that's what I mean about the thing that really drove me with this was not like popping the fairy tale, because it is a fairy tale. It's awesome. It's wonderful. Like, they should be celebrated to the end of time for this amazing story. But like, all that was known about the Spiros character that you're talking about, the man that discovered him, was that he saw Giannis playing tag as a 13-year-old. He hears something from God. God is like, you have found the one, la, la, la. That's literally the only thing that was known about childhood, in addition to sold trinkets on the street. And you really have to stop and like, did God really say, this is the one, because you saw a child running down this, like, he's not doing hurdles. He's just playing tag. He's just being a boy. So I think the thing with Spiros was like, no, actually, this guy's pretty bitter, and he's actually really trying to get money from the situation. And it's not accurate to show this fairy tale when the truth is a little bit more complicated. We can give him credit for discovering, for being kind to them, for helping the family out. No doubt, all those things are true. But at the same time, it isn't this, unanimous, like all these Greek people were helping him. So it's just trying to be a little more measured with this and kind of show the complexity in it.
For sure. Well, I have one more question, and then I'll open it up to anybody else who has questions for you, because I feel like I've talked enough for the night. But I was wondering, just hours ago, we heard that Budenholzer, who's the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks, was fired. So what kind of coach, like what aspects of a coach do you think would be a good one for the next head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks?
I mean, the coach needs the same kind of urgency that Giannis has, the same kind of driven mentality. Bud was a great coach. People don't want to hear that, but like, he was a great coach. Their only title in like 50 years. I think it was hard because he wanted Giannis to rest at times. And Giannis is like, no, I want to be out there 24/7. So whoever's next is going to have to also deal with that as well. How to, let Giannis be this amazing, hardworking, driven person that he is, but also, know when to keep him in check. But I think the coach also, he'd be better at time management, game management, late game decisions. But like I said, Bud, for all the flack he caught for some of those decisions, like, his success was undeniable. I mean, part of me knew this had to happen and that it was going to happen. Part of me is like, there was so much history there. So I hope people actually give him his due and how he built it, because kind of like how Giannis's own success did not materialize for quite some time, Bud like really stuck it out with that team and helped build it. It was like a year after year after year after year process. So I hope the next one though realizes that like Giannis is in a different place in his career. I'm not saying his window's closing, but there is an urgency that happens when athletes get older. He does not have time for a rebuild. Like they need to win and they need to live up to those expectations. And so, yeah, I just think whoever's next is going to have to immediately step in. I think Nick Nurse would be like amazing. But we'll see what happens.
Well, I'll open it up now to our guests. If you don't want to talk, you can feel free and write in the chat, and I can read those chats out loud. Looks like Mark has a question, so.
Yes, and it's not Mark, it's Shweta. Thank you so much. This was wonderful. I'm a huge fan of memoirs in general, whether they're about famous people or just everyday people. And it sounds like I really appreciate journalists that do this work and then turn that into these human stories. So thanks for sharing. And Monica, you had just amazing questions for Mirin, so really appreciate that. My question for you was, did Giannis and his brothers have a lot of sibling rivalry, or were they just really 100% just supportive of each other? It sounds like that's how it is now, but wondering about when they were younger.
Yeah, no, thanks for what you said. And thanks for coming. I had this question burning in my mind because I'm like, okay, I know brothers are not supportive 100% of the time. This is like some, like I said, fairy tale. I fought with my sister all the time. We were definitely like, who's better, all this stuff. I think it was when they were younger. So Alex, the youngest, was like the runt, and they would always make fun of him. They were just like, you're chubby, you can't hang. And there was this like really tall gate, and like he just could not get over the gate. And so they made fun of each other like in a playful way with them. But the thing is like when they're on the court, they are very competitive. Like Giannis wants to beat his brothers. He cannot let them beat him. And the youngest one too, even though he knows it's like, okay, I'm not going to beat Giannis, he's like the best player in the world, he wants to beat him too. I think the supportiveness and all the stuff we've been talking about, it's like the second the game ends, they go back to that. But they are super, super competitive when they're playing with each other. And I actually think the youngest two got so much better because they were allowed to practice with Giannis. Like from what I understand, their work habits they were good, but they weren't Giannis's level. And I think by putting themselves in that competitive environment and like being challenged by their brothers, by Giannis, that's how they got better. I think there was one thing, I don't know if it made it into the book, but I remember it being in my story where Alex, the youngest one, like he wasn't giving full effort one time when they were playing. And Giannis essentially was like, you're embarrassing us. Like, you need to get it together. He was just so hard on him. But again, it's like, it's good competitiveness.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Work is amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Kelly wrote, thank you for sharing this story. So
Thanks, Kelly.
I do have some questions. It was what? Listen, just a minute. Let's see. Is that better? All right.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
it.
Many questions. It's a wonderful book, very compelling story. But a question about the early days and his education. There wasn't very much about that in his schooling. And was that because of access and information that you just couldn't pursue at a certain point? Or was it because of his immigrant status that he was limited to access to school?
Yeah, no, great question. It took me like maybe 4 or 5 months to find his 2 schools. I think we mentioned 2 in there. And that was really, really hard. There's like, it's very hard, like accessing Greek websites and Greek, what is the name of the school before we even like find it. And so I did get there, but the teachers, I think it was partly because he was so quiet. Like there was one anecdote about him, like being outside playing basketball instead of being inside. And so I kind of got the sense that like, it's not that he was a bad student. It was just that his mind was elsewhere. And it wasn't because he was like, oh, I must become a superstar basketball player. I don't care about school. I think it was more just like, oh no, like, what if we don't have enough to eat later? I need to go over here to sell at this point. So I think from the teacher interviews, that's what I got the sense of. His mind was just elsewhere. And they didn't really have any really good anecdotes about what kind of a student he was, because I guess to their knowledge, like he wasn't there a lot of the times. It wasn't like he showed up every day, but I don't want to make it sound like, he wasn't a good student and wasn't punctual or present. It's just, yeah, like there were times where he had to leave. And so I think that's part of it too. Yeah. I wish there was more, because I found that part and then the church to be very interesting, because they're seeing him at such a young age. And this is where so much of your development happens, right? Like your personality, your, the things you're interested in education wise. And yeah, I wish there was more on that, unfortunately.
How much access did you have to the Bucks themselves in developing the story?
Well, this was really hard because, long story short, NBA PR is not the greatest in this modern day age of wheeling and dealing with agents. In another age, NBA PR worked very judiciously to help reporters get stuff. Like if you look at other basketball books, 7 seconds or less, like the Suns PR literally let Jack McCollum travel with them for a season. And so we just do not live in that era. So the Bucks were just not helpful at all. But fortunately, like I knew a lot of people within the organization, and the people that I did know really helped secure interviews with other Bucks people, like present and past. So I was able to get around it in that regard. But yeah, I mean, I wish they would have helped more, because as you know from reading it, it is a love letter to the city of Milwaukee. But I think, trying to put myself in their shoes, when I was working on this, Giannis, we didn't know whether he was going to stay or go in Milwaukee. So there was extreme fear and paranoia of like, is our superstar going to leave? Why would we talk about him in Milwaukee or potentially leaving with anyone? And so it was very hard. And I think there was also a fear of tampering, especially when I reached out to PR of other teams, because he was going to be this free agent. There was a fear that like, if somebody grants an interview to even talk about something as innocent as like, what do you remember about Giannis from, his rookie season or sophomore season? There was a fear that, oh, this interview means that the Suns are talking about Giannis, evidence of tampering, Bucks are fined whatever $1,000. So I can completely see it from their perspective of like the time that this was all happening was not ideal, but at the same time, obviously, I wished for more help.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're on mute. I can't hear the last part.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, I can hear you.
At least you did get to tell the part of the story about the support he got of having an assistant in the apartment building, how he explained and took him around to places. That was a wonderful section.
Thank you. That's literally what I told them. I was like, look, you guys, the Bucks have been nothing but awesome to this man. All I want to do is tell this story of like a real genuine, John Hammond was a father figure. That does not happen in professional sports. I don't know any other GM / even higher than that. The owner was involved in making sure Giannis could stay legally in this country. So yes, I'm just that's why it's like, I knew at some point I wasn't just writing a book about Giannis. I was writing a book about Milwaukee. Like, I felt like the city was a character on its own. And, I had visited Milwaukee like a bunch of times throughout the years, not just for this, but through other stories. And I was like, how can I get acquainted with like the ethos of this place, not just the basketball team and all these amazing supportive people, but like, what does it feel like to be somebody from this place and understand what Giannis means to them? Thanks.
Does anyone have any other questions? Oh, we got another one.
One more. Are there other sports you really love? It sounds like basketball is definitely your sport. Just wondering if there's other sports.
Yeah, I always call myself like the weirdo without a beat because I just will go with whatever story is interesting. So I do like football. I have a football story coming out on Monday, but yeah, actually this will be relevant. It's on Devonte Adams, who so yeah, I guess you guys would. Well, I don't know if you still love him since he left, but anyway, why do my stories keep always coming back to Wisconsin? But I did a story last year on this ultra marathon runner, and I knew nothing about ultra marathons, like absolutely nothing. But I was so intrigued by this woman who does 400-mile races, like not a joke, 400. So I said to myself, why on earth would a human being put themselves through this? And she said, do you want to come with me to the mountain on one of my trails? And so what am I going to do? Say no. So I was like, just don't kill me. I'm in shape, but I'm not in shape like that. And so we went up to this mountain and I got to like really see and experience why somebody would put their body through that. And that story really taught me a lot about how, it isn't necessarily about the sport. It always goes back to the mind and the mental. And it could be ultra marathon, it could be NBA, it could be football. It's like, what is the real story underneath that? So I think if I just covered basketball, I think it would be limiting. My first job when I was at the Orange County Register, I was like the lowest on the totem pole, like the lowest. And then there was me, like I was the least paid. I was the only woman, I was the greenest, youngest, all of that. And they sent me to do lacrosse. They sent me to do water polo. They sent me to do all these other sports I literally knew nothing about. And I had to they said, do you know this sport? And I had to pretend to be like, yeah, and then go study it at night. And so it taught me a lot about like, there's really interesting sports out there that you might not even consider because it's about the person behind it. So I hope to always sort of parachute in and out of different sports because you just never know what you might find. It's really cool. I wish I was more multi-sport growing up. Maybe I could have been exposed to other things I didn't know.
That sounds like you're exposing yourself to
Yeah.
your work. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do you have any advice for someone who is looking to get into sports journalism, who's just starting out? Something that you wish someone had told you when you were first starting?
Well, I wish the veterans I reached out to were more optimistic. Like, everyone's saying, well, journalism, doom and gloom now. Well, it was the same way when I graduated college in 2013. They were so pessimistic, and I wish they would have said, yes, go into this field. Not only is it rewarding, it's so intellectually stimulating, and you will learn so much about empathy and being compassionate towards other people through journalism. Like I used to be a really, really, really shy person. Like I cried when I found out that, participation was going to be 25% of my grade in college. And it just doing this forced me to talk and get out of my shell. And so I would say for anyone who wants to do it, I highly encourage it because no matter what stage you get to, if you get to the book stage, if you get to, you want to be a beat writer, a beat reporter for the Bucks or whoever, there's just going to be really important life skills that you learn. And for me, I've seen that like even the top, Giannis is the best player in the world and he has insecurities and he's vulnerable just like us. Like he fears not being good enough or have enough money, like all these things that we would think he would never struggle with. He's just a human being. There's so many people that are better writers than me. There's so many people that are better, whatever, they're smarter, they're this, but the best advice I have is to just vow to be the hardest worker. I will interview 221 because you can always control that, right? Like somebody's always going to be better than you, but you can control like always making that extra call. Don't be satisfied with 3 people in the draft room. Try to get the 4th. So, yeah.
How would little college Mirin feel knowing that she would have to interview and talk to 221 people?
She'd be like, what is wrong with you? No. I'm telling you, it's a fear that goes way back in high school. I went to this magnet school and they were like, one day the teacher was like, we're going to sit in a circle and do this new thing called Socratic method. And I was like, oh my God, kill me. Cause I can't hide anymore. But it just goes to show like, just because you are fearful of something back then doesn't mean that has to be who you are in 10, 15 years. Like it can change. But, the 221, I mean, what's crazy, so I'm on my 2nd book right now, and it's on Hakeem Olajuwon, which is interesting. Giannis very much looked up to Hakeem Olajuwon, so the book it makes sense to me, like why I chose this 2nd book. But I just did interview 230, and in my head, I'm like, okay, that's a lot, but then I'm like, Hakeem is like 60 years old. Like there's got to be more than 230 people out on this planet that have something to say about this guy. So I guess it always makes you think more. There always has to be one more. I can always find one more story. At least that's what motivates me.
It's like the degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. Like there's always one extra person who's connected.
And at some point, my editor's like, you have to just stop. Like, it's kind of like how I feel about a basketball game. Like, why did one team beat the other team? Well, they ran out of time and one person had one more point, It's kind of like, well, my book deadline's in October. I couldn't interview anymore. I had to stop at some point. So you just hope that it gets you closer and closer to finding out like what's at the core of someone's journey and motivation and all those things.
And is that how you knew you were done? That just like the deadline?
It was crazy. So for perspective, most books, like in general, non-sports books, sports books for nonfiction, you get 2 to 3 years. I only had 1 year with Giannis to report and write. So not just the 221, but then transcribing all of that and writing the book. And that was because of this free agency thing. And it had to come out when it had to come out because we thought the peg was going to be, he's going to stay in Milwaukee or leave, and the book would come out then. We had no idea he was going to win the championship. So that just ended up, life is weird like that. But I'm saying all that because I literally had to stop interviewing because it was due, at some point you're like, the deadline is the deadline and I have to just finish this. And, I had never written a book before. Like I've done tons of long form stories and written for many places in my journalism career, but a book is different. It's like the same language, but a different dialect. And so you're just dealing with so much more information. And it just got really overwhelming and I had to just stop. I was like, you know what? There's just some things about Giannis that are just unknowable to me because the time is running out. And so that was kind of hard to accept, honestly.
I guess that just like further speaks to like you sharing humanity in your writing. Like there's elements about every person that you fully won't ever know, even someone who you know and are super close to. And that's just like part of being human.
You know what's so interesting? I just picked up this book on LeBron that came out like a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks, by the great Jeff Benedict. He wrote the Tiger Woods book, he wrote the Patriots book, and he just comes out with this bio on LeBron. And the thing about LeBron is that people know about his mom, but nobody knows about LeBron's dad. He's never been found. It's never been discussed. It's one of those taboo things that nobody has touched. And there was an article in the New York Times a couple of days ago about how did the author feel, so the author chose not to explore that. And it asked Jeff, like, did you feel a moral obligation to respect the unknowable and respect the boundaries of this person and their family? And he said, yes. He said, like, you know what? I know I'm a journalist, but I respect what I don't know and can't know. And I don't think it's right for me to poke and try to find LeBron's dad. And it's something to think about. I think you'll find a lot of journalists split on that, but I respected his logic. I respected that. And it goes back to your point about, like, there's just certain things that you won't know. For example, Giannis's dad was a soccer player, right? Well, I couldn't find the team. I couldn't find not one team. I contacted all the Nigerian soccer teams. So what does that tell you? Does that tell you he wasn't a soccer player? Not necessarily, but was he a pro? Unclear. So there's just some things that you will never know. You try to come as close as possible to reporting it, but some things you just won't.
What books would you recommend for people who want to read more sports memoirs?
Oh my gosh. Well, so Jeff Pearlman, I'm a little biased because he's my mentor, but he's like the king of sports bios. And he just came out with the Bo Jackson one, which was really good. I really liked Marcus Thompson's book on Steph Curry. I think Marcus is like pretty much the only journalist like Steph has confided in like that over the years. It's called Golden. I thought that was really good. But my favorites, honestly, are the ones of the past, like Jack McCallum. All his book, I mean, they're so, I should just buy new copies. I've underlined them so much. It's like unreadable, embarrassingly unreadable. But I think all of Jack McCallum's books are so good. Yes, he's amazing, but I think we talked about with the Bucks PR, it just reflects a different era of access, and the stories that he has in there are so much richer than what we've got going today. So I'd highly recommend that. But yeah, like literally, I'm going to read this LeBron book when I can come up for air, but I have a feeling it's going to be awesome. So I would recommend that, especially because, I mean, I respect a journalist that's like, look, I know I'm honestly trying to do my job and be an author and sell books, but do I need to put his own trauma on display? No. So I really respect Jeff for his answer on that.
And we know that you're an author who needs to sell your book. So where can we find your book?
Help Mirin afford her lifestyle in Los Angeles, please. I'm 32 trying to live. No, thank you. I appreciate it. Literally anywhere. I know we did a lot with Boswell Books in Milwaukee, but you can get it on Amazon, but I highly encourage indies first. Go to your local independent store. If you want one signed by me, I've got a thing going with Chevalier's. I'm going to write it. It's a bookstore near me in Los Angeles. If you go to their website, you can find the book and it will say option to have signed one, and I can go do that anytime. So yeah, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you.
I will make note of that too, so that when we send our email out at the end of this, everyone will know where to get that copy. Michael says, this has been a wonderful discussion. And yes, I can't agree more. It's 7:30, so I want to respect everybody's time. So thank you all so much for coming. And I will let people go unless there are more questions. Otherwise, we can say good night.
Thank you so much, everyone. This was so fun. I can't believe it's already time. I thank you for your thoughtful questions and for being awesome. I really appreciate it.
It was really great. And again, we are so lucky to have someone with your expertise like take the time out to talk to us about this amazing athlete.
Thank you so much. I hope you all have a great night.